next level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. Thinking not of power, but of possibilities. Not of personal interest, but the public good. And together, we shall write an American story of hope, not fear.
Yeah, I don't buy it. The Biden administration has already been busy creating a lot of possibilities, but they're all motivated by power. And tonight, I'll show you how. I'll show you how Team Biden is well on its way to conducting a monumental shift in our nation that will change it forever. No longer will our most powerful leaders in government be beholden to you, the voter, but instead be beholden to a group of elite businesses, corporations, and international interests in a way from which we may never recover. Welcome to your new stakeholder government. Biden's cabinets, advisors, and closest allies now all sit on this country's board of directors, and they'll make decisions regardless of what you, the American citizen, desires. So what was that, Joe?
Not of personal interest, but the public good.
Yeah, still not buying it. And after this episode, you won't either. Tonight, the Biden oligarchs secretly running America. Hello, America. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the merging of government and private industry as part of the Great Reset, which the left cannot wait to accomplish while America is paralyzed by this stupid pandemic. If you haven't watched that episode yet, which is really part one of tonight's show, I urge you to go back and watch it on BlazeTV.com. One of the pillars of the Great Reset is stakeholder capitalism. It is so vital that you understand what stakeholder capitalism is. I went into about an hour on just that today on today's radio podcast. Stakeholders, instead of shareholders where you're buying stocks on the open market, you're a stakeholder now. So you can own shares, you can be in the company, or you can be represented by your government, because the government will be a partner in a public-private partnership. So instead of just shareholders now, you're a stakeholder. And if you think you're not represented, don't worry. Your voice will be heard through your elected officials in Washington. Now, the stakeholders, it's no longer the interest of the stakeholders to make money. Instead, it's to serve the interests of the stakeholders, causes like climate change and social equality. The Biden administration is now applying the Great Reset concept of stakeholder capitalism to the government. And there's some disturbing news today. The administration is no longer accountable to you. Instead, it serves the interest of certain stakeholders who take priority over you and I. But remember, you and I are a priority because we're being defended by those elected officials. These stakeholders have a vested interest in the actions and policies of the government, financial interest, ideological interest, and too often both. Tonight, I'm going to show you how this is already playing out in the Biden White House. And there is new news on this every single day. Now, hopefully you remember me talking in part one about a company called BlackRock. It is the largest investment firm in the world with almost $8 trillion under their management. There are enough connections between BlackRock and the new Biden administration to make a strong case that it is one of the stakeholders that I'm talking about. BlackRock is also influential in the Great Reset, founded by Klaus Schwab and being talked about this week in Davos with the World Economic Forum. In fact, BlackRock's CEO, Larry Fink, is on the board of trustees at the World Economic Forum. Fink was in the running to be Biden's Treasury Secretary, but he decided to stay at BlackRock instead. Other connections between BlackRock and the Biden White House include longtime Biden senior advisor Mike Donilon, whose brother, Thomas Donilon is the chairman of BlackRock Investment Institute. He was also the national security advisor to President Obama. Then there's Brian Deese, most recently BlackRock's global head of sustainable investing, now the new director of the National Economic Council. And Wally Adeyemo, he was the senior advisor at BlackRock, and now he's the deputy treasury secretary. And yet another BlackRock executive, global chief investment strategist Michael Pyle, has now been named chief economist to Vice President Harris. This means that Pyle and Brian Deese will be working closely together on policy, and they will be officially the first pair from the same Wall Street firm to have jobs as the top economic advisors to the president and vice president. Remember how everybody said how bad Goldman Sachs was? Even Goldman Sachs has never been in that position. But don't worry, you're a stakeholder, and the Biden administration has your best interest at heart. They say they expect these guys to recuse themselves from any issues related to BlackRock. But if you have $8 trillion in investments, everything is related to BlackRock. Even some hardcore progressives are not buying this. Matt Stoller from the left-leaning American Economic Liberties Project told the New York Times BlackRock needs to be broken up and regulated. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink knows this, so he's been storing hack Democrats on ice so they can go into the Biden administration and make sure that that doesn't happen, end quote. Now, it would be out of character for BlackRock to push their weight around like that. I mean, of course, right? Their worldwide strategy involves developing close relationships with governments to get an edge on the competition and to sidestep regulation. That's their real MO. Over the last 16 years, BlackRock hired 84 government officials from around the world, and the strategy obviously works. BlackRock now holds 5% or more of the shares of almost every company traded on the S&P 500. BlackRock also is now so powerful that during the pandemic, the Federal Reserve Bank hired BlackRock to help advise it and buy bonds and funds on its behalf. You know, just the further merging of government and business, which the left has always loved. Where are the people on the left that always accused the Republicans of being in bed with big business? This is it. This is when America becomes an oligarchy. I told you about BlackRock 2 weeks ago. I mentioned their plan to stop investing in any company that gets 25% or more of its revenue from coal operations. Sounds very noble and very green of them, right? Officially, BlackRock is totally on board with the big climate movement. I mean, you kind of have to be if you're involved in the Great Reset. But it's interesting that BlackRock doesn't single out other fossil fuels in the same way. Could it have anything to do with the fact that BlackRock is the world's largest investor in fossil fuels? It has $19 billion in Exxon stock alone, plus large investments in Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and BP. I don't know how any of these people sleep at night. Just $1 of Exxon stock is enough to give Bernie Sanders cold sweats. Well, Bernie better hold on to something, maybe hold on to your mittens, because BlackRock is in talks with the Saudi government-owned oil company Aramco to buy a $10 billion stake in its pipeline business. And in 2019, BlackRock closed a $4 billion deal for a 40% stake in the oil pipelines of ADNOC. That's Abu Dhabi's national oil company in the United Arab Emirates. Also in 2019, BlackRock opened an office in Saudi Arabia to pursue investment opportunities there and in the wider Middle East. They're doing this at the same time we're canceling the Keystone Pipeline. Isn't that weird? By the way, that was less than a year when they started to invest in Saudi, less than a year after the Saudi agents murdered Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who dared be critical of the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The brutal murder of Khashoggi really deeply bothered BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. I mean, deeply, for about half a second. Weeks after Khashoggi's murder, he was one of the CEOs who said, quote, he's making a big deal out of pulling out of Saudi Arabia's future investment initiative, also known as Davos in the desert, end quote. Now, just a couple of months later, BlackRock decided, I don't care that much. They opened their office in Saudi Arabia, and Larry Fink said, and I quote, the region isn't perfect. No region in the world is perfect. The fact is, there are issues in the press that, it doesn't tell me I should run away from this place. It tells me we should run to that place. Really? Putting journalists in a blender like making daiquiris makes you want to run there? Somebody should maybe report that comment to the DNC because it doesn't sound very woke. The left has canceled people for a lot less than, murder, dismemberment, want a daiquiri? Speaking of murderous regimes, BlackRock also is about to start taking major cash from everybody's favorite, China. Last August, BlackRock got permission from the Chinese government regulators to start a mutual fund business in China. Oh, and it just happens to be launching at the same time that a new president is taking office who knows all about special finance deals with China. Isn't that a coincidence? BlackRock's deal is a joint venture with China Construction Bank, the second largest bank in the world, which of course is owned by the Chinese Communist government. Now, why does that sound familiar to me? Well, if you're on the left, you're like, it isn't familiar. But if you're like everybody else in the country, you're like, oh yeah, because Hunter Biden's special deal was also a joint venture with another Chinese government-owned bank, the Bank of China. BlackRock's deal will open to the market for its management investment for Chinese citizens. Well, I mean, not all Chinese citizens. You got those Uyghurs, and the Chinese Christians and the Hong Kong freedom fighters. I mean, we can't have everybody in there, And there might be some other people that Chinese decide to lock up, and maybe there's some people over here that the American administration wants to lock up. Who knows? They can't invest. But other than that, everybody else. Next, I want to show you another stakeholder a little closer to home. It's the one that President Eisenhower warned us about exactly 60 years ago. And boy, did he turn out to be right. When you think about somebody stealing your home, you're like, they can't. I mean, I don't live in a mobile home, so I got that one covered. Except they can. It's called home title theft. And what they do is they file an application. It's easy to do. I'm not going to tell people how to do it, but it's really actually easy to do. It costs you about $30. And you could do a quick claim deed. And with the quick claim deed, all of a sudden they own your house. Well, they don't go and then show up and say, I'm taking your house. They go to a bank. And then they take, and take out a loan of, I don't know, $250,000, whatever they can. And then they beat it. They go to another country. And then you start getting the eviction notice because the bank is repossessing the home that you now no longer own. Your life is destroyed. Home Title Lock will make sure that nobody does that. And if it's already happening, they will spend $250,000 in legal fees to get your home title back. Go to HometitleLock.com, register your address, see if you're already a victim, then use the code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
Hang on. Oh, is that over? I'm sorry. I'm just going to drop a couple eyes in there. I mean, Fink does. I'm making a Fink drink. If he doesn't mind, doing business with people who basically put people in blenders, why not? Anybody for a little Khashoggi? I mean, I'll save it for Larry. There are a couple of eyeballs in there. Larry, there you go. Not a problem. Invest away, my friend, in Saudi Arabia. Okay, that was President Eisenhower. That was his farewell address in 1961. Gee, if we only would have listened back in 1961, maybe the defense contractors who are now going to become major stakeholders wouldn't be major stakeholders in the United States of America. There are a handful of Washington, D.C. think tanks that wield a huge amount of influence in U.S. military and foreign policy. All of President Biden's major State Department intelligence, national security appointments worked at the highest levels of the Obama administration. Okay, but what have they been up to since? Have they made any drinks with the Saudis? Well, many have been working at major foreign policy think tanks, and these think tanks all kind of have something in common. They are mainly funded by the top 10 defense contractors. Now, one of those influential think tanks, the Center for a New American Security, was co-founded by Michelle Flournoy. She was Undersecretary of Defense for Policy in the Obama White House. She was the frontrunner to be Biden's defense secretary, but that job ultimately went to General Lloyd Austin. She co-founded with Biden's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, a strategic consultancy firm called West Exec Advisors. I'll come back to that later. Other Biden White House officials coming from the Center for the New American Security include the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haynes. Well, she was formerly on the CNAS Board of Directors. And the new Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Kahl, well, both Haynes and Kahl also worked in the Obama administration. But 7 of the top 10 defense contractors fund the CNAS. So here's an example of why that might be a huge problem. In December 2019, the CNAS issued a report on the need for the government to spend big on AI research. Then, right after the election, Joe Biden proposed to do just that, innovation funding of $300 billion over the next 4 years. That's weird. I hope he has somebody to advise him what to invest in. Biden's new Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, comes from another influential think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, as does Wally Adeyemo, the former BlackRock executive who is now the new Deputy Treasury Secretary. Now, I guess this is all just an amazing coincidence for these amazing doves who just want peace, that the exact same 7 out of 10 top defense contractors also fund the CSIS. Then there is the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It gets its funds from 3 of the top 10 defense contractors, for peace. The president of the CEIP is William Burns. He was Deputy Secretary of State under Obama. Well, he's the new CIA director. A former senior fellow at CEIP is Jake Sullivan, who's now Biden's national security advisor. He was Hillary Clinton's right-hand man while she was Secretary of State, which means Sullivan was right there, helping with all that great foreign policy of the Obama years, like Egypt, Libya, Syria, Benghazi, Yemen, emailing on Hillary's private server, overseeing and pushing the Steele dossier, all of that stuff, he was center in. I mentioned William Burns and Jake Sullivan because they're also the duo who conducted the secret back channel negotiations with Iran for the nuclear deal. Remember when we flew all that money and just left it at an airport? It was these guys. They met with Iranian officials at least 5 times in 2013. And according to the Associated Press, even while formal negotiations were going on in Geneva, quote, the State Department went to great lengths to conceal their involvement, end quote. Oh, I love secrets. Re-entering the Iranian nuclear deal is now one of Sullivan's top priorities. Now, could there be any additional motive for him wanting to re-engage with Iran? You see, after Obama left office, Sullivan went to work for Macro Advisory Partners, one of these D.C. strategic consultancies that are basically lobbyists with a fancier name. Conveniently, strategic consultants don't have to register as lobbyists. So Macro Advisory Partner says it works just to help clients navigate geopolitical risk. Now, before the election, the firm's website promoted its work with clients in the Middle East. But for some reason, those references have been deleted. Macro Advisory Partners have also removed any reference at all to Jake Sullivan having been a partner at the firm. Now, maybe that's because of a report from the American Prospect, which is a progressive publication, by the way. Sullivan provided, and I quote, forecasting services for corporations. For example, he used knowledge he acquired from negotiating the Iran deal in the Obama administration to help companies profit from the opening of the Iranian economy. Oh my gosh, if this were a Lifetime movie, I'd be in the shower right now rocking back and forth and I just can't get clean. Anybody else feel raped? A Biden campaign advisor who declined to be identified for fear of retribution said, quote, Jake Sullivan's work at Macro Advisory Partners should be disqualifying him from service in a Democratic administration. We don't need a tool of hedge funds and mining companies in the White House, end quote. Too late. Dennis McDonough, is it McDonough? Is another partner. What is it? McDonough. He's another partner at the firm. He's now Biden's new Secretary of Veterans Affairs. And guess who's in on the firm's global advisory board? The new CIA director, William Burns. It's a cute little family. Earlier, I mentioned I would come back to West Exec Advisors. And that's because after Obama left office, the firm was co-founded by Michelle Flournoy and Antony Blinken, who's Biden's new Secretary of State. So what is it that they do? Well, Michelle explained that her firm works with, quote, people recently coming out of government, mostly deputies who have current knowledge, expertise, contacts, and networks. We help U.S. companies that are working overseas deal with those external risks that might affect their business. And we help tech firms who are trying to figure out how to sell in the public sector space. How we help them navigate the DOD and the intel community and law enforcement. Oh, West Exec. Golly gee, when Mom finds out, she's going to give you a big hug. West Exec has a strategic partnership with Jigsaw, Google's in-house think tank. Back in 2012, Jared Cohen, the former Hillary Clinton advisor who founded Jigsaw, emailed Clinton when she was Secretary of State, pitching a Jigsaw project in Syria that would promote rebellion against the Syrian government. I love that. Jake Sullivan allegedly described it as a pretty cool idea, end quote. Which I think is what Sullivan says about every U.S. intervention in the Middle East. Whoa, Jude, that's pretty cool. Want a glass of blood and eyeballs? Another one of West Exec's strategic partners is Pine Island Capital. Flournoy and Antony Blinken have served as advisors to Pine Island. Just 3 weeks after the presidential election, Pine Island raised over $218 million for a new fund to finance investments in, come on, you'll never guess, businesses in the defense, government service, and aerospace industries. Wow, it's like we got a lot of people who are just counting on war. This new fund is called Pine Island Capital Partners. In addition to Michelle Flournoy, guess who else is on the team? Yeah, General Lloyd Austin, Biden's new Secretary of Defense. Not only have these Obama veterans profited handsomely over the last 4 years from their insider knowledge, they're now prepared to reinstitute the disastrous foreign policy that will keep many of their clients happy and rich. The same Obama team that's now working for Obama approved the U.S. support of Saudi Arabia in its war against Yemen. You know, the one that just stopped. Raytheon alone has booked $5 billion in arms sale to the Saudis during the war in Yemen. That level of business, I mean, they have kids to put through college too, you know. And yet we're all supposed to believe that as soon as the Obama veterans step back in the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon, They're just going to put their public servant hats on and magically ignore all the for-profit interests they've been working on for the last 4 years. Unfortunately, defense contractors aren't the only stakeholder that is a giant to be aware of in the Biden White House. Next, everybody's favorite, what could go wrong? Big tech. Does Blinken know how, really, or Fink, does he know how much of a mess blending a journalist actually makes? I don't think he'd like them so much. Joe Biden has been elected. Our new Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, is at the wheel of your financial future with all of this stuff going on. First thing he told Congress was, we're going to go big on money printing stimulus. It's not real good. Zimbabwe comes to mind. So how do you protect yourself? Well, you have to be aware. You have to pay attention now more than ever. And if I might suggest, put your money in something that will be of value if the dollar does collapse. May I suggest precious metals? That's one of the things that I would recommend myself. Don't listen to me for advice. You're smart enough to figure it out. Goldline is offering a huge promotion now on their self-directed IRA acquisitions for retirement accounts. Before the dollar crashes, please call and find out how to protect your long-term retirement portfolio with physical precious metals. Also, Goldline is running an extremely limited inventory special on their legal tender bar cards. These are something that Goldline and I went to the Canadian Mint and we designed. They are minted by the Canadian Mint. They're little teeny 1/10 of an ounce gold bar that you can keep. I asked my wife to keep a card if we're ever traveling. Keep one of these in your pocket or your purse. You never know if the world melts down. It's money that everybody trusts. For every card purchase, you're going to receive a 1/2 ounce pure silver bullion coin at no additional cost. So get them before they're gone. Call now. They're standing by, waiting to hear from you right now at 866-GOLDLINE. 1-866-GOLDLINE. All right, so now let's get to big tech. They're going to be another major stakeholder in the Biden administration, and conservatives especially really don't understand what that's going to mean. We're starting to with the cancellation of Parler and the shutdown of Facebook and Twitter accounts. Landscape is changing, but I don't think you have any idea how bad it's going to get. This is why when you're listening to what I'm about to lay out, please become a subscriber at blazetv.com/Glenn. Use the promo code Glenn. You'll save 30%. Please do it. This may be, in some point in the future, the only way we can have contact with you. And who knows, we may not even be allowed to bank at some point, so it might be free while it lasts. Please support Blaze TV, blazetv.com/Glenn, promo code Glenn. Now, you don't become a big tech stakeholder by being a wallflower. So Facebook has already been trying to suck up to the new White House. Facebook is promoting vaccine and climate change information on its platform, including promotion of the U.S. rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement because Biden has made such a big deal out of those things. Now, you might think Facebook sucking up to the Democratic Party is old news, but not really. Not like this. Lately, progressives have been some of the loudest voices wanting to regulate and break up companies like Facebook. So big tech has to walk a tightrope of still wielding its massive influence while not annoying the wrong progressives. They need a public-private partnership with the government. One way Facebook plans to stay on Biden's good side is by making Nick Clegg, its head of communication and global affairs, the main point of contact between Facebook and the White House. From 2010 to 2015, Clegg was the British deputy prime minister. Well, he and Biden apparently hit it off well when they were both in office and have stayed in touch ever since. Pen pals, when nobody uses pens anymore. Big tech isn't sweating the Biden White House too much, however, because Biden's team is basically the old Obama team. So what does that mean? Well, after Obama left, all those people either went into think tank consultant world, with defense contractors, or to big tech. And just like the think tank crowd, the big tech crowd is now back in the White House. There's Cynthia Hogan. She was a White House lawyer for Biden when she was VP. But since 2016, she's been Apple's lead lobbyist. She left Apple in April last year to join the Biden campaign, where she helped lead Biden's VP selection process. And no surprise, that process led to Kamala Harris, who has her own longtime cozy relationship with big tech. Here she is hanging out with Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook headquarters in 2015. Harris was California Attorney General during that time, when she might have used her office to pressure big tech to show some restraint, but she didn't. When Harris ran for U.S. Senate in 2016, she actually received $214,000 in campaign donations from big tech companies. Sheryl Sandberg personally donated the maximum allowable amount to Harris's Senate campaign. A Freedom of Information Act request for over 1,400 pages of emails from when Harris was in California and the AG show that she generally, quoting, viewed big tech as a partner rather than a threat. At times, she even teamed up with tech companies to market herself as a rising star in American politics, a depiction that proved correct with her election to the Senate in 2016, end quote. Another big tech lawyer, Jessica Hertz, left her job at Facebook's D.C. office, where she helped Facebook navigate the Cambridge Analytica settlement to become Biden's White House staff secretary. Twitter's public policy director, also a former Obama administration guy, left Twitter to join the Biden transition team. Biden's campaign tech policy committee includes several current and former executives at Facebook, including their current director of global competition policy, Howard Solansky. He was also on the tech committee. He's a partner at a D.C. law firm where he has been representing Facebook in the government's recent antitrust probes. Good, now he's on our side. The tech committee also includes employees from Amazon, Google, and Apple. The people on this committee received a list of rules which told them not to discuss their participation, quote, on social media such as Facebook or LinkedIn or your professional bio. They also were warned not to talk or share names of other committee members, not to talk about conversations or communications, and especially do not talk to the press, end quote. Again, more secrets. I love those. Biden's agency review teams that recommend candidates for the hundreds of federal positions that the administration has to fill, are all staffed with dozens of employees from big tech companies, including Google, Amazon, Facebook, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is Mark Zuckerberg's philanthropy wing, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Airbnb, LinkedIn, Lyft, Salesforce, Uber, and Stripe. Stripe, the online payment processor that recently banned the Trump campaign website. You know, the one that would take your credit card so people like me could stay in business and actually have access to banking. So what does this all mean? Well, according to Reuters, quote, researchers, lawyers, and consultants tracking the transition or working with the team told Reuters that the moves are part of a large effort made by many large tech company officials to influence future policymaking. Wow, Reuters, I don't know how you do all that deep thinking in one day. Perhaps the biggest tech titan throwing its weight around D.C. is Google's former CEO, billionaire Eric Schmidt. He now chairs a committee based at the Pentagon called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, which advises Congress on developing AI for defense. What could go wrong, Skynet? From that position, he's been making personnel recommendations for the Defense Department and is being considered to lead a White House technology task force. Interesting side note, Schmidt's vice chairman on the AI Commission is Robert Work, the former Deputy Secretary of Defense under Obama. Work is also a principal at West Exec Advisors. He also happens to be on Raytheon's board of directors. And West Exec just happened to have Eric Schmidt's philanthropy as one of their clients. I mean, this is great. It's one big happy family. In 2019, 1 month after Schmidt stepped down as CEO of Google, he invested in Rebellion Defense, a startup military AI firm. He's now a board member there. Next thing you know, 2 people from Rebellion Defense wind up on Biden's transition team. Not bad for a startup that's barely a year and a half old. But after all we've learned so far tonight, really not much of a surprise. Eric Schmidt, in his official consulting roles with Congress and the Pentagon, passionately advocates for America's military and intelligence agencies to adopt more AI. This should terrify you. Then, as the billionaire investor in military AI companies, he turns around and sells that tack back to the government. Working at the intersection of big government and big stakeholders, a great gig if you can get it, is John Kerry. Oh, he's one of those. And he ushers in the last of the stakeholders. Next. Stephen, did I send you the video of my dog Uno running down? Remind me tomorrow, I'll give it to you. My daughter took it, this video of Uno, he's at the end of the hall, and Tanya just says, want to have dinner? And he runs to his bowl and just laps it up like it's going out of style. This is a dog that we used to have to actually feed by hand. And if you didn't have to feed him by hand, you put it in the bowl and he was actually interested, you'd have to stand perfectly still. And if you moved, he would stop, he'd look at you, and then he'd walk away, and you are done. We couldn't get him to eat. Now he runs to the bowl, and it's not food. This is rough greens. It's not dog food. It's vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and all that crap that we're all supposed to have. Your dogs need it too. It'll promote his health. It will help him live the healthiest life he has, and they love it, and you love it. Get a Jumpstart bag today. See for yourself. See if your dog will eat it. Mine love it. $14.95. Start the process of getting your dog healthier and happier. You want to see your dog thrive again? Go to roughgreens.com/Beck. That's ruffgreens.com/Beck.
A cry for survival comes from the planet itself. A cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear.
Yeah. There's one last urgent stakeholder for the Biden White House, and it's big climate. And this is so important that you go back and watch the episodes on the Great Reset. Just go listen to hour 1 or even the first half hour of of today's radio podcast to get yourself acquainted with the Great Reset. It is urgent. All of this comes back to what they're doing in Davos today. Now, President Biden has appointed his longtime friend John Kerry as the administration's climate czar, and his position has never been elevated like this. No czar has ever sat on the National Security Council until now. In fact, President Biden vows that climate will be a primary focus of the National Security Council. Apparently, Biden sees the climate issue as, quote, having a foothold in virtually every foreign policy and national security issue. Really? Yep. Today, he officially made it a national security issue. Now, Team Biden insists that John Kerry's role will be limited to climate issues, and yet, where will the former Secretary of State have his new climate office? Inside the State Department. Yeah. I love the timing here with this and the UN. Just happens to be the time when the UN has released its new urgent climate report just a few days before Biden's inauguration. And this report warns that countries must, quote, work faster, allocate more resources towards adapting to climate change across both the public and private sectors. Well, it's great. We're putting together public and private partnerships in Davos. Democrats now control Congress. New unelected climate czar Kerry is on the National Security Council. So there's the public sector poised to work faster and allocate more resources. What about the private sector? Well, let me take you back again to BlackRock, the world's largest investment firm I discussed earlier, the company with almost $8 trillion in assets to invest. The company that has 3 executives who have now taken positions in the Biden administration. Well, we just passed the 1-year anniversary of BlackRock announcing that it will place climate change at the core of its investment strategy. BlackRock's CEO Larry Fink said, quote, I believe we are on the fundamental edge of fundamental reshaping of finance. Great. Maybe it's just the fundamental reshaping of the way companies rake in the cash that the government rains on climate initiatives and then blocks everybody who's not a part of the party. But hold on a second. Remember earlier I told you about BlackRock working on a $10 billion deal with Saudi Arabia's state oil company for a stake in its oil pipeline business. So how does that reconcile with the sudden commitment to making climate change the core of its investment strategy, which is making money on oil? Or are they making money on climate change? Here's the best thing about these people. The answer is both. You don't get to $8 trillion in assets by letting your conscience be your guide. Is that Jiminy Cricket? BlackRock would never veer into climate change as a business strategy unless it's going to be very, very big business very soon. And how can they be so confident that it's going to be big business? Well, here's what climate czar John Kerry told NPR recently about this opportunity.
I do believe the marketplace actually has the ability to be a very powerful force for good and for things to happen. And politicians can kind of get in the way and provide some road bumps, but they're not going to stop what's happening now.
They're not going to stop what's happening now. Political debate and compromise are at the core of our system. But did you hear what he said? Politicians are not going to stop what's happening now. He's saying it is our way or the highway. But if you're walking, riding a bicycle, or driving an electric car, of course you can come on in. You're in. If you're not, you're going to get run over. For decades, governments all over the world, including the U.S., have been tossing money to the wind to combat climate change. The U.S. Government Accountability Office reports that between 1993 and 2017, the U.S. itself spent over $154 billion on federal climate change activities. Yet somehow, even with all that insane spending on who knows what, apparently we're more at risk of death by climate change than ever before. Biden administration talks about it being a desperate time, and there's no miracles coming. As if the U.S. has never spent a dime trying to save the climate. President Biden was quoted as saying his new improved National Security Council would, quote, ensure that the needs of the working Americans are front and center in our new national security policy making, end quote. Wow. When you see the Made in America office, which I like to use the acronym, MAO, that he just put in, he means average Americans that agree with his climate policy or are on board with Davos or, our labor unions. How many working Americans, regular Americans, do you know who actually consider climate change a need that should be front and center in our national security policy and the Treasury, like Joe Biden does? I hate to break it to our elite Democrats, but your disproportionate passion for the climate change does not move John and Jane Doe on Main Street, USA. It's almost as if you're using this for another agenda and you don't care anymore, even though they have lost their jobs or their small businesses just in the last year. Believe me, they don't give a rat's hat about your green initiatives and your Paris climate accords. They have a much bigger fish to fry, like actually finding fish to fry to feed their family. The tone deafness here is astounding. Read the room, Democrats. Or do you even need to anymore? They're not going to read the room, and I don't believe they need to anymore. Their priority for the Biden White House is the big climate industry. John Kerry sums it up very well.
What is clear is that the marketplace itself globally is moving in this direction. Real business people, real leaders within the business world understand that this is an imperative. They also understand that there's money to be made in producing the products.
Boy, please do your homework on the Green New Deal and the Great Reset, because this is just obscene and terribly frightening. There's money to be made in producing products. Well, that could be the Biden White House motto. No matter what you thought of Donald Trump as president, the fact is he was elected from a feeling of desperation among many Americans to change the narrative in Washington and actually do what they say. After 8 years of Obama overreach, voters looked at Hillary and said, I don't want any of this kind of corruption. I don't want any of this stakeholder bullcrap. Well, fast forward 4 years, and we're not back where we started from. We are in worse shape today because they spent 4 years plotting and planning. For all of now President Biden's talk about bringing the nation together, the only thing he's truly bringing back together is the old band from the Obama White House and corruption at a totally new level. We have actual term limits for presidents. There are no term limits for presidential teams. Therefore, the Obama administration is getting another crack at things. They know how the system works, and they learned. And they also learned that you better act fast in the first 100 days and definitely the first 2 years, because that may be all the time you get. The media is wetting itself with excitement over the return of radical normalcy. Radical normalcy is Team Biden, and it means making crony capitalism great again. That's all that really Joe Biden knows. If you've worked in the federal government for over 40 years, maybe you just can't help yourself anymore. You become one with the swamp. The Biden administration talks about wanting to be the most transparent White House ever, but they're not being honest with you because they have not made a single effort to do things any differently. It's not hard to look at the world's largest investment firm, BlackRock, and say, you know, maybe we should stop with the BlackRock thing because of all of the conflicts of interests. That's really not hard to determine if you care. Yet the Biden administration has already made dozens of hires that at best don't look very good and at worst involve potential corruption. The government of the people, by the people, and for the people may have perished from this earth. How did we let this happen? The Biden White House is already making it clear that this government is of the elites, by the elites, and for the elites. What is it going to take to reclaim the government by the people, for the people? Will it take a larger and even more persistent Tea Party movement? Well, if it does, you need to focus on the local level because national is already too big. The swamp is too vast for one president to deal with in one term. It will take a prolonged effort at the grassroots level of exposure and protest to chip away at stakeholder government, if we can. On yesterday's radio program, I talked about an oligarchy and Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum. They are meeting with world leaders in Davos. His number two partner actually did a big, long Twitter thread on me. It looks like we might be onto something. They seem to be squirming a lot, especially for a little guy on the internet. And you're at Davos. What's up?